We put so much effort into learning skills, right? Like, think about pilots, neurosurgeons, years of training.
Oh, absolutely. Rigorous, intense preparation.
But then, when it comes to our own emotions, how we handle relationships, all that really core stuff that makes up our lives.
We're sort of expected to just figure it out, left to chance almost.
Exactly. It's a strange gap. And for listeners keen on getting knowledge quickly and deeply, this whole area feels, well, neglected.
It really does. This huge focus on professional learning versus this kind of casual approach to emotional development.
So in this deep dive, we're digging into an emotional education from the School of Life, introduced by Alain de Botton. We've got excerpts here, and we'll explore the core ideas.
Great. And the book starts by saying emotional intelligence isn't just one thing.
Right, not like you either have it or you don't.
Yeah, it's more like a whole range of skills. Things like understanding yourself, introspection,
Communicating feelings?
reading others' moods, patience, empathy, even imagination comes into it.
So no one's totally emotionally brilliant or completely clueless. Everyone's got a mix.
That's the idea, strengths and weaknesses.
Okay, so the book breaks it down, looking at our emotional lives through different lenses.
Exactly. Understanding our own feelings, first off, then relationships, obviously. Work plays a big part too, emotionally.
And culture, how does that fit in?
Yeah, how our culture shapes, or maybe doesn't shape, our emotional understanding, that's actually where it starts.
Okay, let's get into that, the culture angle.
Well, the book kind of asks, has modern culture really replaced something like scripture in guiding us emotionally?
Interesting question.
It points to museums as like these amazing smart filing cabinets for art and libraries as architectural encyclopedias.
But not places you'd necessarily go if you were, say, struggling with finding meaning or needed help forgiving someone.
Precisely. They're not really set up for those urgent personal emotional needs, are they?
Which is funny because the book argues art used to do that job much more directly.
Oh, definitely. Think Renaissance Florence, Marsilio Ficino, this idea that beauty could actually impress values on you.
So not just nice to look at, but actively educational for the soul.
Exactly. They used art, architecture, music deliberately to shape people's inner lives. Botticelli's Madonna of the book is a key example.
Right, it wasn't just admired aesthetically.
No, it was meant to really drive home the importance of things like maternal care, sacrifice, quiet thought. Beauty was the delivery mechanism for the emotional lesson.
It really makes you think, doesn't it, as we've become more secular?
Have we maybe thrown out some useful stuff?
Yeah, like rituals or regular reminders, things that help us remember these big emotional truths that, we might know intellectually but forget to live by.
The book suggests a good school, whether literal or metaphorical, should rehearse what we know but easily forget.
Which ties into another point about overlooking simple truths.
Yes, that many of the most important emotional insights are actually pretty straightforward, like trying to understand someone before condemning them, or seeing anxiety behind someone's actions, not just cruelty, or accepting that strengths and weaknesses often go hand in hand.
These aren't exactly rocket science, but living them consistently is hard.
Incredibly hard. And the book argues that sometimes we dismiss these truths because they sound simple. We expect deep insights to be complex.
Yeah, we want the complicated answer. But it points out how seemingly small things from our past can have huge effects later on, right?
Huge effects. Like maybe someone's relentless drive for money isn't just ambition, but actually stems from never feeling seen by a parent.
Or relationship patterns going right back to infancy.
Exactly. Early attachment stuff. The key, the book says, is being sophisticated enough not to reject a truth because it sounds like something we already know.
Resisting that dismissal of the obvious. Okay, so this connects to the whole idea of the School of Life itself, the title, Alain de Botton's involvement.
Right. There's a deliberate paradox there. The phrase the school of life usually means learning through tough experiences, doesn't it? Painful trial and error.
Yeah, learning the hard way.
So the school of life, the organization and the idea in the book, it represents this hope that maybe we can learn these crucial life lessons more systematically.
A bit more efficiently. Without quite so much stumbling.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Learn them before, half our life is over.
And it loops back to Socrates' know yourself.
Yes, but crucially, his addition. I am wise not because I know, but because I know I don't know.
Which adds a whole other layer. It's not about achieving perfect self-understanding.
Not at all. It's more about appreciating just how tricky our own minds are. The biases, the defense mechanisms, how easily we misread things. and ourselves.
Recognizing the limits. The book mentions things like Rorschach ink blots, those psychological tests.
Right, and the Rosenzweig picture frustration study.
How do they fit in?
Well, the idea is that how we interpret something ambiguous, like an ink blot or a frustrating little cartoon scenario, reveals a lot about us.
Less about the ink blot, more about our own internal wiring.
Exactly. Our emotional inheritance, our default ways of seeing and reacting, especially when we feel, say, humiliated or challenged. The ink blot itself is neutral. Our story about it isn't.
This leads into a really core concept in the book. Primal wounds.
Yeah. Deep psychological injuries from childhood.
And it suggests they're almost universal, even if you had well-meaning parents.
It's a bold claim, but the logic rests on just how incredibly dependent human children are for so long.
Compared to other animals.
Totally. A foal's up and walking in hours. A blue whale, relatively quick independence. But us, we have this incredibly extended pupillage, nearly 2 decades, absorbing everything from our caregivers.
Their habits, their anxieties, the whole emotional atmosphere. Like sponges.
Extremely sensitive sponges. And this is why the book challenges the idea that our adult temperament is just, fixed destiny. That's just how I am.
It suggests it might be more about being kind of knocked off a more fulfilling trajectory by those early experiences.
Precisely. It gives examples. The parent who was always competitive or disapproved of your body, or was unreliable financially, or maybe just emotionally distant.
Or volatile, or smothering, or just not really paying attention.
All these things can subtly shape us, creating patterns, maybe a fear of failure, trouble with closeness, an odd relationship with money.
And these aren't necessarily us deep down, but adaptations we made back then.
That's the perspective, which also helps explain why we often resist digging into our emotional past.
Why? What are the reasons?
Well, several things. Sometimes we just pretend we're simpler than we are. It's easier.
Or we fear looking silly if we admit to having a complex inner life.
Yeah, that too. Or we use common sense as a shield, dismissing uncomfortable insights. And maybe, deep down, we just long for a non-tragic, straightforward personality.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable territory. The book then sketches out what a more emotionally healthy childhood might look like.
Right. Things like having a steady, reliable caregiver that builds trust.
Experiencing that things can be broken, but then fixed, that builds resilience. Like the example of Dutch storm paintings showing survival.
Yes, that resilience piece is key. And also, crucially, coming to see caregivers realistically, not as perfect saints or total villains, but as mixed bags.
Which helps us have more realistic expectations of people later in life.
Absolutely. It prepares you for the fact that everyone, partners included, will have flaws alongside their strengths.
Okay, so given these potential wounds and our resistance to looking at them, the book really champions psychotherapy.
It does, positions it as a really vital tool for overcoming those inherent weaknesses we have in understanding ourselves, trusting others, communicating well.
Calls it one of the most significant developments even. What are the key elements it highlights?
Several moves in therapy. The first is just witnessing.
Meaning.
Creating that rare space where you can actually say the unfiltered stuff, the daft thoughts, the pathetic worries, the alarming fantasies.
Without being judged or shut down.
Exactly. In normal life, we edit constantly. Therapy offers a place for, well, radical honesty, which can combat deep loneliness.
Then there's listening. But not just any listening.
Right. The point is, it's actually really hard to think deeply and coherently about our big issues on our own. Our minds wander, we get defensive.
So the therapist helps hold the thread.
Yeah, holds the thread, keeps you focused, helps you examine things properly, like the direction of a relationship or meaning in work, or why you react so strongly to your partner doing X or Y.
And it's not just intellectual insight.
No, it's about re-experiencing feelings in that safe space, too.
And the relationship with the therapist becomes important in itself.
Hugely important. It acts like a litmus test. You inevitably bring your usual patterns into the room.
Like trying to seduce them, or being cold, or idealizing them, or maybe being dismissive.
All of that. The therapist sees it, can gently point it out, and you can explore why you do that and how it plays out elsewhere in your life. It's a chance to see damaging patterns in action and work on them.
Okay, and what about inner voices?
Ah, yes. We all have them. Those internal critics, judges, often formed by internalizing external voices from our past.
And they're often pretty negative.
Often very harsh, yeah. Defeatist, punitive. Therapy helps you identify those voices, question their authority, and cultivate a kinder, fairer internal judge.
Like becoming a better friend to yourself. Offering the same sympathy you'd give someone else.
That's a great way to put it. Learning self-compassion.
And the last therapeutic move mentioned is philosophical meditation. Sounds grand.
It's not about, like, Zen emptiness. It's about actively setting aside time to untangle worries, examine ambitions, process emotions that haven't been dealt with.
Ordering the mind, basically. Reducing the fear of what's inside.
Yes, making conscious what's often just a messy, unprocessed jumble floating around causing anxiety.
All this focus on self-knowledge then leads to rethinking what's actually normal.
Yeah, the book argues our picture of normality is often way off. We see everyone else's edited highlights, their public face.
And we assume our own messy insides, the envy, the weird thoughts, the insecurities are unique and shameful.
When actually the book insists that stuff is ubiquitous. It's normal to be envious sometimes, or crude, or sexual, or feel weak. The goal is to reduce the shame, make it less dangerous, to be honest.
And it even reframes breakdowns, not just as failures.
Right. Sees them potentially as moments of urgent emotional learning. A sign that some unheeded part of you is demanding attention.
So listen to the illness. Don't just try to shut it up.
Kind of, yeah. What is this distress trying to tell me? Maybe about unmet needs for rest or connection or authenticity?
This connects to charitable interpretation, doesn't it? Looking at others and ourselves with more understanding.
Definitely. When someone acts foolishly or badly, try to consider the backstory, the potential trauma, the pain underneath, the fact that everyone was once a baby, vulnerable and dependent.
It mentions tragedy and art helping here.
Yes, tragedy encourages that complex view. It lets us hold on to the idea of a tragic failure, someone flawed, who messes up, but isn't just evil. They still warrant some empathy.
And ultimately, kindness comes from realizing nobody is free from weakness.
Exactly. That shared vulnerability is the basis for compassion.
Speaking of understanding people, there's that distinction between unpleasant actions and the often pitiable motives behind them.
Yes, the Androcles and the lion fable illustrates that perfectly. The lion's aggression masked the pain of the thorn.
So look for the thorn.
Look for the thorn, yeah.
Yeah.
What pain might be driving this behavior?
And then there's the contrast between the frank person and the polite person.
Right. The frank person sort of assumes everyone's robust, like them, and just speaks their mind directly.
Which can be good, but might lack sensitivity.
Sometimes, yeah. The polite person, on the other hand, assumes everyone is potentially fragile and needs careful handling, prioritizes kindness.
And then the diplomat.
The diplomat is interesting. They deliver the bad news, the difficult truth, but do it frankly out of kindness. They see directness, in the long run, as the truly considerate path.
Okay, this feels like a good transition into relationships and challenging some romantic ideals.
Oh, big time. The book really takes aim at the classic romantic package.
Like love being the magical end to all loneliness.
Yeah, or that choosing a partner should be purely based on overwhelming feeling. Or that you should delight in every single facet of your partner.
Or that neither of you should ever need to change or grow.
Exactly. It paints these as lovely fantasies, but ultimately unhelpful. Real generosity in love, it argues, involves seeing your partner's flaws clearly and accepting them anyway.
And accepting the need for ongoing reassurance. It doesn't stop after the honeymoon phase.
Not at all. And behaviors that look like withdrawal or control can actually be these distorted pleas for tenderness and security.
It suggests using an infant model sometimes.
Yeah, like instead of assuming malice when your partner is difficult, consider if they're just exhausted or maybe testing boundaries like a child might. It shifts the interpretation.
And it stresses honesty about sex, acknowledging it's often not normal or straightforward.
Absolutely. The need for open communication there is paramount.
Even the view on affairs is reframed, not just about a new person appearing.
No, it argues affairs usually start way before that. They begin in the small fissures within the couple, maybe lack of tenderness, sexual disengagement, feeling unseen.
The new person is often just a symptom, not the root cause.
That's the idea.
Oh.
And arguments. Oh, the book has a lot to say about arguments.
Like they often happen because we just haven't been taught how to communicate our needs.
Exactly. There's this massive mismatch between the message we want to send, usually something like, love me, understand me, feel my pain, and how we actually deliver it.
Which is often through accusations or sulking or getting angry.
Right. We lack the skills. It also talks about the defensive argument.
What's that?
It's where one partner might actually be right about the other's flaw, but they deliver the insight as an attack.
Which just makes the other person defensive and unable to hear it or change.
Precisely. The truth gets lost in the delivery. And it challenges that common idea that the calmer person in an argument must be the one who's right.
Because sometimes intense emotion, even rage, can be a sign that a real truth is being ignored.
It can be, yes. Calmness isn't always synonymous with correctness.
There's also the argument of normality in relationships.
Yeah, this tendency to argue about what's normal or what one should expect. The book flips it, saying much of what's good in a relationship is actually profoundly unnormal.
Like someone finding you attractive despite your flaws, or tolerating your annoying habits.
Exactly. These are gifts, not entitlements. So instead of arguing about normality, be vulnerable. It would make me really happy if...
And what about unrequited love? The book offers a rather bracing perspective.
Yes. A bit blunt, perhaps. It suggests it often persists simply because you don't really know the other person. You're in love with an idealized version.
Ignorance is bliss in a painful way.
Kind of. And it mentions the incumbent problem, how new people, new places, new jobs always seem more appealing because you haven't seen their downsides yet, unlike the familiar ones you know inside out.
That's so true. The book also cautions the romantic obsession with love being the only thing, devaluing friendship.
Right. Suggesting maybe love isn't the sole point of existence, and deep friendships have immense value.
And then there's that very modest argument for marriage. Not romantic at all.
No. It frames marriage almost like a beneficial prison, something hard to get out of easily.
Which helps how?
By providing structure and inhibiting those short-term impulses to flee when things get tough, forcing you perhaps to work through issues you might otherwise abandon, it's certainly unconventional.
Definitely. Okay, shifting slightly, let's talk about the dangers of being good. That concept of the good child.
Ah, yes. The child who learns early on to suppress their own needs, their anger, their true feelings, just to keep the peace or please caregivers.
And the potential problems that causes later.
Big problems. Difficulty with anger, hidden resentments, maybe finding it really hard to stand up for themselves or deal with conflict healthily.
And related to that, the fear of looking foolish. How that holds people back.
Hugely. That fear can lead to massive underconfidence, missed chances, playing it safe all the time.
It brings in Erasmus, In Praise of Folly.
Yes. The liberating idea that actually everyone's a bit of a fool sometimes. Accepting our own ridiculousness can bring a lot of peace.
Makes sense. And imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Often from two things. Having a really unrealistic, idealized picture of people at the top, assuming they're somehow fundamentally different, more capable, less anxious.
And maybe how we saw our parents as kids, as these all-knowing giants.
Exactly. We internalize that gap, the solution, trusting that most other people, even successful ones, are probably just as anxious and uncertain inside as we are.
Right. Okay, what about fame and work?
Well, the desire for fame, it suggests, often comes from a deep need for kindness, for recognition.
But the reality isn't always kind.
Often not, no. Fame can attract resentment as much as admiration. And then there's the sorrow of work.
Which is?
That feeling that most jobs only use a tiny fraction of who we are, of our talents and potentials. It quotes Walt Whitman, "I am large, I contain multitudes."
And it's okay to mourn those unfulfilled parts of ourselves. It's not just being ungrateful.
No, it's seen as a legitimate sadness, acknowledging the roads not taken.
Then there's this fascinating bit about art and commerce.
Yeah, contrasting Juzen's ironic supermarket art, highlighting the sort of disappointment with commercial life.
With something like the Sainsbury Center for the Visual Arts, funded by a supermarket chain, but focused on higher values.
Right, it floats the idea of a synthesis, maybe. Capitalism potentially aligning better with deeper human values.
It even brings in Mandeville's Fable of the Bees.
Yeah, that paradoxical idea that consuming fripperies, luxuries, actually drives the economy and provides jobs.
But it goes further, suggesting advertising, while selling trivial stuff, often understands our deep needs really well.
Incredibly well. Ease for better relationships, confidence, meaning. The crisis, it suggests, isn't the ads, but that product development hasn't caught up. Businesses aren't yet creating enough things that genuinely meet those deep needs.
So future business opportunities might lie in things like building communities, helping raise kids well, managing anxiety, finding talents.
That's the implication. Addressing real psychological and emotional needs, not just material ones.
And this ties into inequality, too. It's not just about money.
No, financial hardship is real, obviously, but the psychological sting of low status, the humiliation, is also huge.
It uses that painting, Netcher's The Lace Maker,
as a reminder to see the skill, the intelligence, the dignity and labor that society often doesn't respect, if we could see that more widely.
It could lift some of the psychological weight of poverty.
That's the hope, yes. Change the perspective.
The book also contrasts classical and romantic temperaments. That seems useful.
Very. Helps understand different approaches. Romantics valuing intuition, the ideal, purity. Classics valuing analysis, realism, accepting ambivalence.
Intuition versus analysis, idealism versus realism, purity versus mixed bags.
Basically, yeah. Different lenses on the world.
And then there's the psychology of value, using the pineapple.
Yes, the pineapple history is great. Shows how dramatically price affects our appreciation. When it was incredibly rare and expensive, it was revered.
Now it's commonplace, we barely notice it.
Exactly. We've inherited this idea from pre-industrial times that cost equals value, but now production costs are often low for amazing things.
We fetishize prices.
Yeah.
Let them dictate our excitement.
The book argues we have, yeah. Contrast it with how a child might value a simple toy for its charm, not its price tag.
It mentions Cézanne's apples, evoking that simple, non-price-driven appreciation.
Right. Trying to recover that ability to be excited by things that aren't expensive. It's a cultural issue, not fixed human nature.
Which leads to finding beauty in the ordinary, the imperfect, like those Dutch landscape paintings.
Jacob van Ruysdael, yeah. Finding beauty not just in sunny perfection, but in overcast skies, muddy riverbanks, the everyday reality.
And the Japanese idea of kintsugi.
Oh, that's beautiful. Repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer.
Highlighting the breaks, making them part of the beauty.
Exactly. Celebrating the history, the flaws, the resilience. It's a powerful metaphor for embracing our own imperfections and scars.
Art's role in consolation comes up again, too.
Yes, how even pessimistic art, like Anselm Kiefer's work, can be weirdly cathartic. It acknowledges the sorrowful side of life, which counters toxic positivity.
Makes us feel less alone in our struggles.
Yeah.
Part of a nation of sufferers.
Precisely. Ennobles our private woes by connecting them to a universal human condition.
And art as a transitional object, like a kid's security blanket.
Sort of, yeah. Winnicott's idea. Art functions like a sophisticated version, offering comfort, connection, understanding, finding soulmates in artists across time.
Intimacy at a distance.
That's the phrase. It's about consciously arranging our cultural world to help console and nurture us.
And near the end, it brings in Winnicott again with the good enough parent.
Yes, applying that idea more broadly, undercutting perfectionism in all areas, the quiet heroism of just getting through ordinary life, being good enough.
And the importance of gratitude.
Especially as we get older, perhaps. Actively noticing what hasn't gone wrong, appreciating the simple things that are okay, rather than only focusing on unmet grand ambitions.
And it wraps up with 12 ingredients of wisdom, mentioning realism and accepting folly.
A nice summary touch.
So pulling it all together for this deep dive, we've seen emotional intelligence isn't one thing, but this crucial toolkit. Our past shapes us profoundly. Self-knowledge is this ongoing, sometimes difficult process.
And our ideas of normal and value are often pretty skewed by culture.
Right. Relationships need clear eyes and skills, not just romantic notions. And wisdom seems to involve facing reality, including our own flaws, that melancholy maturity.
It all weaves together, doesn't it? A more compassionate, realistic view of ourselves and others.
Indeed. So here's a final thought to leave our listeners with. Think about one of those seemingly small emotional knots in your life. A recurring pattern, maybe? Or a frustration?
Okay.
Could it perhaps be tied to a past experience, maybe one you've dismissed as insignificant? What might happen if you looked at that connection with that kind of accepting melancholy maturity the book talks about?
How might that shift things?
Exactly. How might understanding that link without harsh judgment potentially open up a slightly different way forward, something to definitely keep exploring?